They expected the vampire king to reject the burn-scarred single mom. Instead, he held her hand. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. In the heart of a small town, there lived a woman named Emily. She was a single mother, raising her young son on her own. But there was something that set her apart from others: her face. A tragic accident had left her with deep burn scars, and the once radiant woman was now often seen hiding behind the long strands of her hair, too self-conscious to reveal her face to the world. Emily had become used to the stares, the whispers, and the judgment. Every time she left her home, she felt the weight of society's unkind gaze. People treated her like she was invisible, or worse, something to be feared. Despite her pain, Emily had one thing that kept her going: her son. She loved him fiercely, and she would do anything to ensure he had a better life. One day, Emily received an unexpected invitation to a prestigious charity gala in the city. The event was known for its high-profile guests, including powerful figures from all over the world. Emily almost declined, thinking there was no way someone like her would fit in. But when her son's school called to inform her that his scholarship would depend on her attendance at a fundraising event, she couldn't say no. Nervously, she attended, trying to blend in and stay unnoticed, her heart racing with every step she took. As she entered the grand ballroom, Emily felt out of place. The lavish decorations and elegantly dressed people made her feel like a stranger in a foreign world. She was just a simple woman, wearing a modest gown and hiding behind the long sleeves that covered her burn scars. But her son's future depended on this night. She couldn't back out now. Emily walked quietly among the crowd, feeling the stares but trying not to acknowledge them. That's when she saw him. The Vampire King. His presence was undeniable, tall, commanding, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the crowd. His power and confidence radiated off him like a tangible force. He was everything she was not, the perfect picture of wealth and authority. But when their eyes met, something unexpected happened. Instead of the disdain or indifference she had grown accustomed to, there was a flicker of something else in his gaze. Curiosity, maybe? Or was it something more? Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. She quickly looked away, not daring to believe that someone like him would even acknowledge her existence. But as the night went on, the unexpected kept happening. The Vampire King's eyes kept finding hers. She could feel his gaze on her, even when she wasn't looking. It was as though he was watching her every move. And then, to her shock, he approached her. The crowd parted, and there he was, standing before her. His presence was overwhelming, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. "You're Emily, aren't you?" His voice was deep and commanding, yet there was something gentle about it. She nodded, unsure of what to say. How did he know her name? Was this some kind of joke? The Vampire King smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made her feel a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "I've been watching you," he said. "You're not invisible to me, Emily. You never were." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to speak, to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. The Vampire King reached out, and in front of everyone, he took her hand. The room seemed to freeze. For a moment, Emily forgot about her scars, about the world that had always rejected her. In his touch, there was no judgment, no fear, just acceptance. And in that moment, she realized something. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she had thought. The Vampire King's hand still rested gently in Emily's, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the cold sting of rejection. The ballroom, once a space filled with overwhelming judgment and glances that made her feel like an outsider, now seemed strangely quiet. The Vampire King's presence was commanding, and yet, in his touch, she found something unexpected. Comfort. She had spent so many years hiding, avoiding the world that saw her scars first and her heart second. But now, standing before the most powerful man in the room, she felt seen in a way she never thought possible. As the music continued to play softly in the background, Emily's thoughts swirled. Was this some kind of mistake? Did the Vampire King truly see her? Or was he simply being kind because it was the right thing to do? Her heart raced as she looked up into his piercing amber eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt heavy, as though she had been carrying this question for years, and now, facing him, she needed an answer. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that seemed to melt away the tension in the air. "Because you're worth seeing, Emily," he replied softly. "The world has made you feel invisible, but I see you. Not the scars, not the past, just you." His words resonated deep within her, shaking the foundation of everything she thought she knew about herself. She had always believed that people saw her scars first and everything else second. But here, standing in front of a man who could have anyone, she was seeing herself in a new light. For the first time in years, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. But as the warmth of his touch settled into her skin, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the room around them. She knew that not everyone in the ballroom would understand. The whispers, the judgment, they were still there. She could feel the eyes of the other guests, the way their gazes lingered on her, trying to figure out why the Vampire King, a man with power beyond comprehension, was holding her hand. "We should go somewhere quieter," he said, sensing her discomfort. Emily nodded, unsure of what to expect but too exhausted to resist. She had spent her life in the shadows, but for some reason, she felt safe in his presence. He led her through the crowded ballroom, his hand still holding hers firmly, guiding her away from the prying eyes. As they reached a private balcony, the sounds of the party seemed to fade away, replaced by the soft rustle of the wind and the distant hum of the city. The Vampire King released her hand, but she didn't feel the loss. Instead, she felt something else, a sense of security. "I know this is unexpected," he said, his voice gentle yet full of an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "But I've been watching you, Emily. I've been watching your strength, your resilience. There's something about you that stands out, something that I can't ignore." Emily turned to face him, her heart racing. She had no idea what he meant by watching her, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in his eyes. The Vampire King, someone who had seen centuries pass by, who had lived a life of unimaginable power, was talking to her like she mattered. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just the woman with burned scars. She wasn't just the broken single mother. She was Emily, and that realization hit her harder than anything else ever could. "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why would someone like you care about someone like me?" The question hung in the air, a fragile thing that she wasn't sure she was ready to ask, but needed to. The Vampire King looked at her, his expression softening. "Because we've both been through pain, Emily," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to feel like the world has turned its back on you. I've seen what it does to a person. But you found a way to keep going, even when everything seemed impossible." Emily's heart swelled with emotion. His words, simple as they were, struck a chord deep within her. She had always felt like an outsider, like she wasn't enough. But here, with this man who had the world at his feet, she felt like she finally mattered. It was a feeling she didn't think she would ever experience again. She had spent so many years fighting to protect her son and herself, but now, for the first time, she realized that maybe she wasn't alone. The Vampire King wasn't just offering her kindness, he was offering her understanding. And that, she realized, was something she had never allowed herself to believe she could have. As they stood together in the quiet of the balcony, Emily felt a shift inside her, one that she hadn't expected but welcomed with open arms. She wasn't just surviving anymore. For the first time in years, she was beginning to believe that she could truly live. Emily stood on the balcony, her heart racing with a mix of emotions she hadn't felt in years. The Vampire King's words echoed in her mind, filling her with a strange sense of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. As she looked out over the city, the lights twinkling in the distance, she realized that, for the first time in her life, she wasn't completely alone. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't just the woman with burned scars, the broken single mother. She was Emily, and maybe that was enough. But still, doubts lingered in the back of her mind. She had been burned, both literally and figuratively, and trusting someone, especially someone like him, seemed impossible. The Vampire King, however, seemed to sense her hesitation. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming but comforting at the same time. "You don't have to be afraid," Emily, he said softly. His voice was low and soothing, and it made her heart flutter in a way she didn't fully understand. I won't hurt you. I just want to help. Emily looked up at him, her gaze locking with his. His amber eyes seemed to see straight through her, and for a moment, she felt exposed. But there was no judgment in his stare, no pity, just understanding, and it made her want to believe him. I don't know how to trust anymore, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of the city. I've spent so long protecting myself, my son. I don't know how to let someone else in. The Vampire King reached out, gently taking her hand again. His touch was warm, steady. You don't have to let anyone in, Emily. Not until you're ready, he said. But you don't have to do this alone either. I can help if you'll let me. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had never been good at asking for help. She had always prided herself on being independent, on doing everything herself. But the world had a way of wearing a person down, and she was tired, so tired. She glanced at her hand in his, feeling a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. What are you asking of me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I'm asking for your trust, he replied simply. I'm asking you to give us a chance, to let me show you that there's more to life than surviving. You deserve more than just getting by, Emily. His words cut through her like a knife. She had always believed that survival was all she could ask for. Her life had been a constant struggle, every day a battle just to get through. But here he was, offering her something more. Could she really take that step? Could she really let go of the fear that had held her back for so long? Emily's mind raced, but as she looked at the Vampire King, she realized something. This wasn't just about him. It was about her too. She had been living in the shadows, afraid to let anyone see the real her. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to step into the light. I don't know if I can, she whispered. It's scary. It's scary to think about trusting again. The Vampire King gave her a reassuring smile. I know it's not easy, he said, but you don't have to do it all at once. Just take it one step at a time. And I'll be here, every step of the way. Emily took a deep breath, her chest tightening with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of the world, afraid of people, afraid of herself. But in that moment, she realized that maybe the only way to truly live was to let go of that fear. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I'll try. The Vampire King's smile grew warmer, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take that step into the unknown. As the night wore on, they continued to talk, the Vampire King sharing bits of his own past, a past filled with loss, pain, and power, and Emily listened, her heart opening to the possibility of something she had never allowed herself to believe in. A future. It wasn't going to be easy, she knew that. There would be challenges, fears to overcome, and obstacles to face. But in that moment, standing on the balcony with the Vampire King, Emily felt like maybe, just maybe, her life could be more than just surviving. Maybe it could be something more, something beautiful. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe it. The following days passed in a blur for Emily. The once seemingly impossible idea of allowing herself to be cared for, of trusting another person, began to feel less like a fantasy and more like a reality. With each passing moment, she found herself growing more comfortable with the Vampire King's presence. His words echoed in her mind, offering reassurance whenever her doubts crept in. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here, every step of the way. It was a promise she wasn't sure she could believe in at first, but each day she spent with him, she began to feel the weight of that promise lifting her from the depths of isolation. One afternoon, as Emily sat at a quiet cafe near her apartment, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the Vampire King. I'll be at your door in 30 minutes. Prepare yourself. She couldn't help but smile. He had a way of appearing just when she needed him most, and it wasn't just his presence that helped, it was the way he made her feel. He made her feel safe, seen, heard, something she hadn't felt in so long. She closed her phone and took a deep breath. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, brick by brick, to protect her heart. The scars from her past, both visible and invisible, were all too real. But with each passing day, Emily felt those walls slowly starting to crumble. She stood up, smoothed down her clothes, and glanced in the mirror. Her reflection still bore the marks of a painful past, but there was something different now. There was a spark in her eyes. Hope, something she hadn't felt for years. When the doorbell rang, she didn't hesitate. She opened the door to find the Vampire King standing there, looking as regal as ever. His amber eyes met hers, and she could see the same warmth and understanding she had seen in him before. He stepped forward, his hand gently brushing her cheek, his touch soft and tender. "You look beautiful, Emily," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they meant everything. "I'm glad you decided to take that step." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "I'm still scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to let go of everything I've built to protect myself." The Vampire King looked at her, his expression softening. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting your past, Emily," he said. "It means accepting it, embracing it, and realizing that it doesn't define you. You are not your scars. You are not the pain you've endured. You are so much more than that." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent so long fighting against her past, against the scars that marked her body and soul, that she hadn't realized how much power she had within her. She was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. And in that moment, standing before the Vampire King, Emily realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop fighting and start living. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice filled with determination. The Vampire King's eyes lit up, and for a moment, Emily saw something in him she hadn't noticed before: vulnerability. She had always seen him as this powerful, untouchable figure, but in that moment, she understood that even he had his own fears. "I know you are," he said, his voice low and gentle. "And I'm here, every step of the way." With that, he took her hand again, leading her out into the night. Together, they walked through the streets of the city, the lights casting a soft glow around them. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was living, truly living, for the first time in years. As they walked, Emily's mind wandered to the future. She wasn't sure what it would look like, but she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore. The Vampire King had shown her that there was more to life than surviving. There was love, there was hope, and there was the possibility of something beautiful. And as they walked hand in hand, Emily couldn't help but believe that, together, they could face whatever the future held. The days after Emily took that first step felt like a new beginning, but it was not without its challenges. There were moments when the old fears crept back into her heart, whispering that the world would never truly accept her. Even with the Vampire King by her side, she still wasn't fully convinced that she was worthy of the life he was offering. But each time those doubts surfaced, he was there to remind her of her strength. They spent more time together, getting to know each other in ways that felt both familiar and new. The Vampire King, with his centuries of experience and his powerful presence, wasn't the intimidating figure Emily had once imagined. Instead, she found him to be thoughtful, patient, and unexpectedly gentle. There was a depth to him that went beyond his authority, a vulnerability he only revealed to her. And Emily, for the first time in years, felt like she could let her guard down, even if only a little. One evening, as they sat together in his private study, Emily noticed the way his fingers traced the rim of his glass, his gaze distant. It was rare for him to show such a vulnerable side, and she couldn't help but ask, "What's on your mind?" The Vampire King looked up, his amber eyes meeting hers. "It's nothing," he said with a soft smile, though Emily could see the shadow of something darker behind his gaze. "Just memories. Old ones. I've lived a long time, Emily, and sometimes those memories have a way of resurfacing when you least expect it." She sensed that there was more he wasn't saying, but she didn't press him. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand on top of his, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "You don't have to carry it all alone," she said quietly. "I'm here, you know. You don't have to hide anything from me." The Vampire King's smile softened, and he squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you, Emily. But some things are hard to share." Emily nodded, understanding. She had her own scars, her own history, and there were parts of herself she wasn't ready to open up about either. But that was okay. They didn't have to be perfect, they just had to be there for each other. As time went on, Emily found herself becoming more comfortable in her own skin. She was still the woman with burned scars, still the single mother who had fought so hard to protect her son. But she wasn't just those things anymore. She was Emily, a woman who had finally allowed herself to be seen, to be valued, and to love again. The Vampire King helped her realize that the scars didn't define her. They were a part of her, but they weren't the whole story. She was so much more than that. She was strong, capable, and worthy of the love and acceptance she had always longed for. One evening, as they walked through the garden of his mansion, Emily felt the weight of the world fall away. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. The scent of flowers filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt at peace. "You're quiet," the Vampire King said, glancing at her. "What's on your mind?" Emily smiled, her heart light. "I was just thinking about how far I've come," she said softly. "How much I've changed since we first met. I didn't think I'd ever be able to feel like this again." The Vampire King stopped walking and turned to face her. "You've come further than you think, Emily. You've faced your fears, your pain, and you're still standing. That's more than most people can say." Emily looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never imagined that her life could be anything other than a struggle. But now, standing here with him, she realized that the future held so much more. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, about embracing the possibilities that lay ahead. "I used to think that the scars were all I had," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But now, I see that they're just part of who I am. They don't define me. I'm not my past, and I'm not my pain. I'm me." The Vampire King smiled, his eyes warm with affection. "Exactly. And that's what I've always seen in you, Emily. You are more than you know. You've always been enough." Emily's heart fluttered at his words. She had spent so many years doubting herself, believing she wasn't worthy of love, of happiness. But here, with him, she felt like she finally understood. She was worthy, and for the first time, she truly believed it. The future, once uncertain and filled with fear, now felt full of promise. Emily wasn't alone. She had the Vampire King by her side, and together, they could face whatever came their way. As they stood in the garden, the last rays of the sun fading behind them, Emily felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and that, she realized, was enough. The days turned into weeks, and Emily found herself slipping further away from the shadows that had once held her captive. Every day with the Vampire King felt like a new chapter, a fresh start. She still had moments of doubt, but with each passing day, she was learning to trust herself, trust him, and trust that the life she had once dreamed of was not beyond her reach. They had grown closer, their connection deepening with each conversation, each shared moment. The Vampire King was not just her protector, but her equal, someone who understood her in ways no one else could. His presence was comforting, and yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much she didn't know about him. One evening, as they sat in his study, Emily couldn't help but ask the question that had been gnawing at her for days. "You've told me so much about your past," she began, her voice steady but curious. "But what about the future? What do you want, really? I mean, after everything you've been through, what's left for you?" The Vampire King paused, his amber eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, Emily thought she had asked the wrong question, but then he spoke, his voice softer than usual. "The future," he repeated, as if the word itself was foreign to him. "I suppose I've never really thought about it. I've lived so long, seen so much, that the future has always felt uncertain." Emily leaned forward slightly, sensing the weight in his words. "Uncertain," she echoed. "But you have power, influence. You've lived for centuries, seen things no one else could imagine. Don't you have any desires, any dreams for what comes next?" The Vampire King's eyes softened as he regarded her. "Desires, dreams. When you live as long as I have, those things tend to fade away. People, relationships, they come and go. What's the point in dreaming when you know the end is inevitable?" His words hung in the air, heavy with the pain of centuries of loss. Emily felt a pang in her chest for him. She couldn't imagine living a life where hope and desire had been buried under the weight of endless years. She reached out, gently placing her hand over his. "But you don't have to face it all alone," she said quietly. "I'm here, and you've shown me that it's never too late to start living. I want to help you find that future you've forgotten." The Vampire King looked at her, a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. For the first time, she saw a hint of vulnerability in him, the man who had seemed so unshakable. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "I've spent so much time focused on surviving, on protecting what's left, that I forgot what it feels like to want something more." He took a deep breath, as though the idea of hope was something unfamiliar to him. "I've seen many things in my life, but I never expected to find this. To find someone who makes me feel like maybe there's more to life than just existing." Emily's heart swelled at his words. The connection between them was deeper than she had realized. They were two people, both scarred by their pasts, both struggling to find a sense of belonging in a world that often seemed indifferent. But together, they were starting to rebuild. "So what do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice hopeful but still tinged with uncertainty. The Vampire King smiled, his expression softening in a way that made Emily's heart skip a beat. "We live," he said simply. "We take it one step at a time. I've been waiting for a reason to live, and maybe this is it. Maybe it's you, Emily." She felt her breath catch at his words, the weight of his confession sinking in. She had never expected this. Never expected that her journey of healing would lead her to someone like him. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before, the possibility of a future. A future where they didn't have to face their pain alone. A future where they could be more than just survivors. As they stood together in the quiet of the study, Emily knew that there would still be challenges ahead. They both had scars to heal, both physical and emotional. But for the first time, she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone. And with the Vampire King by her side, she knew that anything was possible. The future was no longer uncertain. Together, they would face whatever came their way, one step at a time. As the days passed, Emily's life slowly began to take on a new rhythm, one filled with purpose and new possibilities. She had never imagined that, at this stage in her life, she would find someone who truly understood her, someone who could see her beyond the scars and the pain. The Vampire King had become more than just a figure of power to her. He had become her partner, her equal. They had shared so much with each other, their fears, their dreams, their deepest secrets. Yet, even with all that they had revealed to each other, Emily knew that there was still so much to uncover. She felt that there was something weighing heavily on the Vampire King's heart, something he had yet to share. He had told her about his past, the loss, the centuries of solitude, but Emily sensed that there was more, something deeper that he wasn't ready to speak of. One evening, as they walked through the gardens of his sprawling estate, Emily could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken words hanging between them like a cloud. The sun had just begun to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. As they reached a quiet bench, the Vampire King stopped and turned to her, his amber eyes searching her face. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he said, his voice softer than usual. Emily's heart raced. She had never seen him so serious, and the air around them seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, unsure of what he was about to say. The Vampire King sighed deeply, his expression haunted. "It's about my past," he began, his gaze drifting to the horizon as though he were searching for the right words. "I've lived for so long, seen so many things, and in all that time, I've made choices that have come with consequences." Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had known that. His past wasn't easy, but hearing the weight in his voice made her realize just how much he had carried alone for so many years. "What kind of choices?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King turned to face her fully, his eyes filled with a sadness she hadn't seen before. "I've hurt people, Emily," he said quietly. "Not just enemies, but people I cared about. In my pursuit of power, I've made mistakes, and some of those mistakes have left scars that will never fade. I can never undo what I've done, and it's a burden I've carried with me for centuries." Emily felt a pang of sorrow for him, for the man who had given so much of himself to protect others, only to be haunted by the things he couldn't change. She reached out and took his hand, gently squeezing it. "You're not the man you were back then," she said softly. "You've changed, and you've done so much good in this world. The past doesn't define you. What matters is who you are now, who you are with me." The Vampire King's gaze softened, but there was still a shadow of pain in his eyes. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself," he said, his voice breaking. "I've done things I'm not proud of, and sometimes it feels like no amount of good can ever make up for it." Emily shook her head, her heart aching for him. "You don't need to be perfect, you know. You don't have to carry that guilt forever. We all make mistakes. What matters is that you're trying to do better now. You're not the same person you were back then. And I believe in you, in us." The Vampire King looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, but then, as if a weight had been lifted, he nodded. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time to let go of the past and start living for the future." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with love for him. She had never imagined that she would be the one to help him find peace, but in that moment, she knew that they were both healing, together. "We'll take it one day at a time," she said, her voice steady. "And no matter what happens, we'll face it together." The Vampire King nodded again, his hand tightening around hers. "Together," he echoed. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat in silence, side by side. Emily felt a sense of calm she had never experienced before. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next wave of pain or rejection. She was here, in this moment, with him, and that was enough. They didn't need to have all the answers. They didn't need to know exactly what the future would hold. All that mattered was that they had each other. And for Emily, that was more than she had ever hoped for. The days following their heart-to-heart conversation were filled with a sense of calm that Emily had never known before. As time went on, the Vampire King seemed to find a peace he had long been searching for, and Emily realized that the future they had been dreaming of was no longer just a dream. It was becoming their reality. They spent countless hours together, their bond deepening with each passing day. Emily was no longer just the woman who had once hidden from the world. She was the woman who stood beside him, someone who had overcome her fears and was ready to live fully. But even as their lives began to fall into place, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their peace was fragile, as if the calm before a storm was always lingering just out of sight. One evening, while they were having dinner in the grand dining room of his mansion, Emily noticed the Vampire King had grown quiet, his eyes distant once more. It had become a familiar sight, and Emily knew that something was bothering him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice gentle as she reached for his hand across the table. He looked up, and for a moment, Emily saw a flicker of the same pain in his eyes that he had shared with her on that day in the garden. "I thought I could leave it all behind," he said quietly. "But there are forces in my world, Emily, forces I can't control. The past doesn't just disappear, and I can't protect you from it forever." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The Vampire King had never spoken of his enemies in detail, but she knew that his power, while vast, had come at a price. His past was filled with enemies who would stop at nothing to see him fall, and Emily couldn't ignore the reality of the danger they were facing. "What do we do?" she asked, her heart pounding in her chest. The Vampire King looked at her with a resolve she hadn't seen before. "We face it together. I've spent so long running from my past, but now, I realize that the only way to move forward is to confront it head-on. And you, Emily, you've shown me that I don't have to do it alone." Emily squeezed his hand tightly, determination in her own heart. "We're in this together," she said, her voice strong. "I don't care what the world throws at us. We face it together, no matter what." The Vampire King smiled, a small but genuine smile that made her heart swell. "You are stronger than I ever imagined, Emily, and that's why I know we will get through this." The days that followed were filled with a mix of tension and anticipation. Emily could feel the weight of the threat that loomed over them, but she also knew that they had something neither of them had ever had before: each other. Together, they could face whatever was coming. One evening, as they walked through the gardens once more, Emily felt a sense of foreboding that she couldn't shake. The air felt heavier, the night darker, as if something was approaching. As they made their way toward the mansion, a dark figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking their path. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the figure before them. It was a vampire, but not one she had ever seen before. His presence was cold, predatory, and the look in his eyes was full of malice. "I've been waiting for this moment," the vampire said, his voice dripping with venom. The Vampire King thinks he can hide behind his walls, but the past always catches up. The Vampire King stepped forward, his expression hardening. "I thought you'd be the last to show your face, Darien," he said, his voice calm, but with a dangerous edge. "You've been hiding in the shadows for far too long. What do you want?" Darien laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that sent a shiver through Emily's body. "What do I want? Oh, I want everything. I want the throne you stole from me. I want your blood. And I want her," he said, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Emily. "You think you can hide her from me forever, but you're wrong. She's the key to everything." Emily felt a wave of fear wash over her, but she stood her ground, refusing to let Darien's words control her. The Vampire King stepped in front of her, his eyes glowing with an intensity that could have set the world on fire. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Not now, not ever." Darien smirked, his hand twitching as if ready to strike. "We'll see about that," he hissed, before disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. The Vampire King turned to Emily, his expression tense but resolute. "We can't run from this anymore," he said, his voice steady despite the danger that loomed over them. "But I promise you, Emily, I will protect you, no matter what it takes." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. They were no longer just two people trying to rebuild their lives. They were now part of a much larger battle, one that would determine not only their future, but the future of everything they had fought for. But as long as they had each other, Emily knew they could face whatever came next. The following days were tense, filled with a quiet anxiety that lingered in the air, wrapping itself around everything. Emily could feel it, the weight of the threat Darien posed, the promise of a storm that was on the horizon. The Vampire King had always been a figure of immense power, but even he couldn't escape the consequences of his past. The battle that had been inevitable had finally arrived, and there was no turning back now. Emily spent those days with him, staying close, her heart tied to his more tightly than ever. She knew that this was their reality now, that they couldn't hide anymore. It was strange to think that just a short time ago, she had been hiding from the world, afraid of the future, unsure of who she was. Now, she was standing side by side with the Vampire King, ready to face whatever came their way. The night fell heavy as the Vampire King prepared for what he knew was coming. Emily stood by his side, watching him, knowing he was bracing himself for a battle, not just with Darien, but with the ghosts of his own past. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered, her voice steady despite the anxiety swirling inside her. The Vampire King turned to her, his amber eyes softer than they had been in days. "I never intended for you to get caught up in this," he said quietly. "This is my fight, Emily. I should have dealt with this long ago, but I waited. Now it's too late." Emily took his hand, holding it firmly. "We're in this together, remember?" she said, her voice full of certainty. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." He squeezed her hand in return, a gesture that spoke volumes. He didn't need to say anything more. The unspoken bond between them was enough. They were a team now, and nothing, not even the horrors of his past, would change that. That night, they both knew that the confrontation with Darien was coming. But what Emily didn't know was that there was something even darker lurking beneath the surface, something tied to the Vampire King's past that had yet to fully reveal itself. Darien wasn't just a vampire seeking revenge. He had a much deeper connection to the Vampire King, one that Emily could never have predicted. As they prepared for what might come next, the Vampire King shared with her the final piece of his past, the secret he had kept buried for so long. "Darien isn't just an enemy," he began, his voice tight with emotion. "He's my brother." Emily's heart skipped a beat at his words. "Your brother?" she repeated, barely able to comprehend what he was saying. "I thought you said you had no family left." The Vampire King nodded grimly. "I thought I didn't either. But Darien and I share more than just blood. We share a history, a kingdom, and a betrayal that runs deeper than you could imagine. We were once allies, but I betrayed him, and now he wants to destroy me. He wants to destroy everything I've built." Emily stood in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of his revelation. "Why? Why did you betray him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King's face darkened as he looked away. "Darien was never meant to rule," he said bitterly. "He was always reckless, power-hungry. I had no choice but to take control, and when I did, it destroyed everything between us." He became obsessed with revenge, with tearing me down. And now, after all these years, he's here, ready to finish what he started. Emily could see the pain in his eyes, the depth of the regret he felt. She reached out to him, gently touching his arm. "You didn't want this, did you?" she asked softly. "You didn't want to hurt him." The Vampire King met her gaze, his expression filled with sorrow. "No, I didn't. But sometimes, the choices we make have consequences that we can't take back." Emily's heart went out to him. She knew what it was like to live with regret, to carry the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. But what she also knew was that the past didn't define them. They had the power to change, to build a future together. As the night stretched on, the tension between them grew. Emily could sense that the moment of confrontation was drawing near. The Vampire King was ready, but so was she. No matter what happened, she would stand by his side. She had already seen the man he was now, the man who had fought through centuries of darkness and pain. And she knew that together, they could overcome anything. The sound of footsteps interrupted their thoughts. A shadow loomed at the edge of the garden, and Emily's heart began to race. It was time. Darian was here. The battle they had been avoiding was now upon them. The Vampire King stood tall, his posture commanding, but there was a look in his eyes that Emily hadn't seen before, not fear, but determination. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was facing his past, and with Emily by his side, he would finally make peace with it. Darian stepped forward, his presence dark and menacing. His eyes locked with the Vampire King's, and the tension in the air was palpable. "You're ready for this, brother?" Darian sneered. "Ready to face the consequences of your betrayal?" The Vampire King didn't flinch. "I'm ready to end this," he said, his voice unwavering. And in that moment, Emily knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. No more running. No more hiding. Together, they would take on whatever the future held. The air was thick with tension as Darian's presence loomed over them. Emily could feel the weight of the moment, the anticipation hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. The Vampire King stood tall before his brother, his posture steady, his expression hardening with resolve. Emily could sense the emotions swirling inside him, the years of pain, betrayal, and guilt that had been building up for centuries. And yet, in this moment, he was ready to face it all. He was ready to face Darian. Darian sneered, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and jealousy. "You think you can stop me, brother? You've always thought you were better, always thought you could control everything. But you've lost, and now I'm going to take what's mine." The Vampire King's voice was calm, but there was a fire behind it. "You've lost sight of everything that matters, Darian. Power doesn't make you stronger. It makes you weak." Emily could feel the heat of their confrontation, the charged energy between the two brothers. They weren't just fighting for dominance. They were fighting for their very souls. "You don't get it," Darian said, his voice shaking with fury. "You took everything from me. I was the rightful heir, and you stole that from me. You ruined everything." The Vampire King's eyes darkened, but his voice remained steady. "I didn't want to take anything from you. You pushed me to make the choice I did. And now here we are." Emily watched them, her heart racing as the tension between the brothers grew thicker. She could see the deep wounds, the unresolved anger, and the betrayal that had festered for far too long. But she also saw something else. The Vampire King was no longer the man he had been all those centuries ago. He had changed. He had grown, not just in power, but in heart. And she knew that this time, he would not let his past define him. Darian stepped forward, his movements swift and deadly, but the Vampire King was ready. With a speed that only someone of his power could possess, he blocked Darian's strike, their bodies clashing with an intensity that made the earth beneath them tremble. Emily took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen anything like this before. The power, the force, the raw emotion, it was all so overwhelming. She knew that this fight was not just physical. It was personal. It was a battle for everything they had ever believed in. The Vampire King and Darian moved with a fluidity that made it impossible to track their every movement. The air crackled with energy as they fought, each strike a testament to years of pain, regret, and desire for vengeance. But as the fight raged on, Emily began to realize something. This wasn't just about winning. It was about healing, about confronting the past, and finding closure. Darian's rage was all-consuming, But the Vampire King's resolve was unshakable. As the fight continued, Emily could see the shift. The Vampire King was no longer fighting for control. He was fighting for redemption, for the chance to right the wrongs he had committed so long ago. And in that moment, Emily knew that whatever happened, the Vampire King was not the man he once was. He was someone new, someone who had learned from his mistakes and was ready to face his future. With a final, powerful strike, the Vampire King knocked Darian to the ground, his brother lying at his feet, breathing heavily, defeated. The silence that followed was deafening. The air, once charged with violence, now hung heavy with the weight of their shared history. Darian glared up at his brother, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. "You think this is over?" he spat, his voice hoarse with anger. The Vampire King didn't flinch. "No, but it's a start." Emily stepped forward, her heart swelling with pride for the man who had fought not just for victory, but for peace. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would still be battles to fight, both external and internal. But for the first time, she felt the weight of the past begin to lift. The Vampire King had faced his demons, and now, together, they could face whatever came next. As they stood there, side by side, the future felt more certain than ever before. The battle was not over, but they had won something far more important, the chance to begin again, to write their own story. And as Emily looked at the Vampire King, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As the dust settled from the confrontation with Darian, the atmosphere in the mansion was tense, yet oddly peaceful. Emily stood by the window, watching as the night sky stretched above them. The stars twinkled with a serenity that seemed to mirror the stillness in her heart. The battle had been won, but it wasn't over yet. She knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't facing them alone. The Vampire King stood beside her, his presence a constant reassurance. After Darian's defeat, the mansion had been quiet, almost too quiet. Emily could sense the weight of his past still lingering in the air, like a shadow that refused to fully fade. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, turning toward him. He looked at her, his amber eyes deep with thought, but there was a softness there now that hadn't been present before. "I will be," he replied, his voice low but steady. "It's just a lot to process. The things I've done, the things I've lost, the things I've fought for." He trailed off, his gaze shifting toward the horizon. Emily could see the conflict in his eyes. Even after everything, the scars of his past still ran deep. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm, grounding him in the present. "You don't have to carry it all alone anymore," she said quietly. "You've done more than enough. It's time to let go of the past." The Vampire King turned to her, his expression softening. "I know," he said, his voice a whisper. "But some things aren't so easy to forget. The years of solitude, the betrayals, the decisions that can never be undone." He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Emily nodded, understanding more than he could know. She, too, had her own past to confront, her own scars that were not easily healed. But she had learned something over the past weeks, something she had never allowed herself to believe before. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about accepting it and moving forward, together. "We don't have to forget," she said, her voice steady. "But we can choose to heal, to build something new. A future, not just for us, but for everyone we care about." The Vampire King looked at her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was more than gratitude, more than love. It was something deeper, something that had taken centuries for him to realize. He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. "You've taught me more than I ever thought I could learn," he said softly. "Not just about love, but about living." Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. "We all have something to teach, even if we don't know it yet." The night stretched on, the silence between them comfortable now, filled with an unspoken understanding. Emily knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be moments of doubt, of fear. But as long as they had each other, she knew they could face anything. The world outside may have been filled with uncertainty, but within the walls of this mansion, they had found something precious, a sense of peace, a sense of home. The Vampire King had faced his demons, and in doing so, he had found redemption, not in the eyes of others, but in his own. Emily had faced her past, and had learned to embrace the woman she had become. Together, they had built something stronger than either of them had ever known. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Emily felt a renewed sense of hope. The future was no longer a terrifying unknown. It was a promise that she and the Vampire King would face it together, no matter what. He turned to her, a smile playing on his lips, and for the first time in centuries, the weight of the past seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Emily looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "No need to thank me," she replied. "We've always been in this together, and we always will be." They stood together in the quiet of the morning, the world outside still asleep, but for the first time, Emily felt truly alive. The past was behind them, and the future was waiting. And no matter what it held, they were ready to face it, together. As the days turned into weeks, the changes in Emily's life became undeniable. She was no longer the woman who hid from the world, the one who feared the judgment of others. She had transformed into someone stronger, someone who had found her place beside the Vampire King. The weight of the past, the scars that once defined her, no longer held her down. They were part of her, yes, but they did not control her anymore. The future was hers to create, and she wasn't afraid to face it. Yet, as peaceful as things had become, Emily could still feel a sense of lingering unease. It was subtle, a whisper in the back of her mind, reminding her that peace was often fragile. But she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't alone. The Vampire King had shown her what it meant to trust again, to believe that she was worthy of love and happiness. And with him by her side, there was nothing they couldn't face together. One morning, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the vast grounds of the mansion, Emily glanced at the Vampire King, who had been unusually quiet. His eyes were distant, as though he were lost in thought, and she couldn't help but wonder if the past still haunted him. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly, her voice gentle but filled with concern. The Vampire King looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice steady but lacking the usual warmth. Emily could see the subtle tension in his posture, the way his shoulders were slightly hunched, as if he were carrying an invisible weight. "You're not fine," she said, her tone more insistent now. "What's bothering you?" The Vampire King sighed, his gaze turning back toward the horizon. "It's not just about us," he said slowly. "It's about everything I've done, everything I've fought for. The world may have moved on, but I still feel the consequences of my actions, of the decisions I made when I was a different man. Even with you, even with what we've built, I can't help but feel the shadow of the past lingering." Emily's heart ached for him. She knew that his past was complicated, filled with regret and mistakes, but she also knew that he wasn't that man anymore. He had changed. They had both changed. "You don't have to carry it all," she said quietly. "We've already faced so much together, and we'll keep facing it, one step at a time. You don't have to keep fighting alone." The Vampire King turned to her, his eyes softening, and for the first time in days, she saw a hint of the man she had come to know, the man who had opened his heart to her, who had shown her that love could heal even the deepest wounds. "You're right," he said, his voice tinged with gratitude. "I've spent so much of my life trying to protect everyone, trying to fix the things I've broken, that I forgot what it meant to live for myself, to live for us." Emily smiled gently, reaching out to take his hand. "It's not about fixing everything. It's about moving forward. Together." The Vampire King squeezed her hand, the weight of his worries seeming to lift, if only slightly. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the world around them quiet except for the soft rustling of the trees in the breeze. Emily could feel the weight of their shared journey, the struggles they had overcome, and the strength they had found in each other. She had never imagined that she would be standing here, by his side, in this moment of peace. But now, she couldn't imagine her life without him. Their future was still uncertain, there were still battles to be fought, but together, they had everything they needed. Emily turned toward him, her eyes filled with determination. "We've come so far," she said softly. "And no matter what happens next, we'll keep going. We'll build something better, something stronger. Together." The Vampire King looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion, and he nodded. "Together," he echoed, his voice steady with conviction. As they sat there, side by side, The future seemed a little less daunting, a little more within their reach. The world outside would always be unpredictable, but as long as they had each other, they knew they could face anything. The storm that had once seemed so overwhelming now felt like a distant memory, and Emily knew that no matter what trials awaited them, they would face them together. And that was enough. The weeks that followed the confrontation with Darian were filled with a sense of change. The Vampire King, once a figure weighed down by his past, now seemed lighter, freer. Emily had stood by him through it all, and together, they had faced the ghosts that had haunted his life for centuries. Their bond had deepened, not just through their shared experiences, but through the way they had both learned to let go of the past and embrace the future. The mansion, once a place of solitude and shadow, had transformed into a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the promise of something better. But Emily knew that there would always be challenges ahead. They had won the battle with Darian, but the world they lived in was still full of dangers, and the Vampire King's past was never far behind them. Yet, she also knew that as long as they faced those challenges together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. One evening, as they sat in the garden, the Vampire King turned to Emily with a contemplative look on his face. "Do you ever wonder what could have been?" he asked quietly, his voice thoughtful. Emily looked at him, her heart filled with understanding. "I used to," she said softly. "I used to wonder what my life would have been like if things had been different. If the world had been kinder, if my scars didn't define me. But now, I realize that those what-ifs don't matter anymore. What matters is now, and what we're building together." The Vampire King smiled, his eyes warm as he gazed at her. "You're right," he said. "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. And I want to shape that future with you, Emily." Emily smiled back, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never imagined that her life would turn out this way. She had once believed that happiness was something out of reach, something that belonged to other people. But now, standing beside the man who had once been a stranger, who had now become her everything, she knew that happiness was hers to claim. "We've come a long way," she said, her voice filled with pride. "And we'll keep going, no matter what comes next." The Vampire King reached out, taking her hand in his. "Together," he said, his voice full of certainty. And as they stood there, hand in hand, under the starry sky, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together. They had both been through so much, and yet here they were, stronger than they had ever been before. The battles, the pain, the loss, it had all led them to this moment, to this life they were now building side by side. As the night stretched on, Emily leaned her head against the Vampire King's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. She had spent so many years afraid of the world, afraid of herself, afraid of love. But now, she knew that love wasn't something to fear. Love was something to embrace, something that healed and strengthened. And with the Vampire King by her side, she had found a love that was not just about surviving, but about thriving. "I never thought I'd get here," Emily whispered, her voice soft. "I never thought I'd find a place where I could truly be myself, where I could be loved, scars and all." The Vampire King turned to her, his expression soft and full of affection. "You are more than enough, Emily," he said, his voice low and steady. "Your scars don't define you. You are strong, beautiful, and worthy of all the love this world has to offer." Emily smiled, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. For the first time in her life, she truly believed him. She had spent so long hiding from the world, believing that she wasn't enough. But now, standing here with him, she knew the truth. She was enough. She was worthy. And together, they would build a future that was filled with love, laughter, and everything they had ever dreamed of. The road ahead was uncertain, but as long as they had each other, they knew they could face anything. The world was full of possibilities, and they were ready to embrace them all. With the Vampire King by her side, Emily had found something she had never thought possible: a future full of hope, full of love, and full of the promise that together, they could overcome anything. In this gripping tale of transformation, redemption, and love, Emily finds herself caught in the tumultuous world of vampires, where every decision can change the course of her life. As she embarks on her journey with the Vampire King, she learns that even in the darkest corners of the past, there is hope for a brighter future. This is not just another of the many vampire stories you have heard before. It is a tale of self-discovery, the struggle to move forward, and the power of love to heal old wounds. Through each battle, both emotional and physical, Emily finds herself growing stronger, learning that the scars that once defined her no longer hold her back. With the Vampire King by her side, Emily faces enemies, confronts the ghosts of the past, and realizes that her future is full of possibilities. These vampire stories are not only about fangs and power struggles, but about the human heart's capacity to heal, love, and forgive. The relationship between Emily and the Vampire King blossoms into something unexpected, as they both come to understand the true meaning of trust and companionship. Their love story is one that transcends time, proving that even centuries of pain and regret can be overcome when two souls unite. As they navigate this thrilling adventure, they discover that the world of vampires is much more than just a realm of darkness. It is a place where new beginnings can flourish. If you're a fan of vampire stories that combine heart, action, and emotional depth, then this is a journey you will not want to miss. Witness the unfolding of an unforgettable love story as Emily and the Vampire King face the shadows of their past and build a future filled with hope, strength, and an unbreakable bond. This tale will remind you that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with fangs, but with the heart. Dive into this captivating world of vampire stories, where love conquers all and every challenge is an opportunity for growth.